said too, I think it's good for our people to hear directly the challenges the person who's running the business every day.
Oh. Good morning. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I know people are still walking in, but I wanted to extend a warm welcome to you for joining our first ever Cambridge Small Business Summit. So thank you very much for being here. My name is Iram Farouk. I'm the Cambridge's Assistant City Manager for Community Development. Community Development is the city's planning agency, and as part of that, we have the Economic Development Division who've been working really closely to put together today's event. Working with many of you, I know that the agenda for today has actually been created by crowdsourcing ideas through a survey. So hopefully you're going to find this incredibly valuable and what you are looking for, because it is the agenda that you have helped us create. But I want to make sure I give a shout out to our economic development staff who are in the back. So Lisa Hemmerly, Pardis Safari, and I don't see Christina Delicio, but she will be in here shortly. So I did want to say that the economic development team, I suspect many of you have met with them for various reasons already, but they work incredibly hard and work closely with individual businesses and with the various businesses associations across the city, connecting people to grant programs, providing technical assistance, education and training, and also helping essentially support things like permitting, signage, and also helping people support their entrepreneurial growth. So last year, recognizing this significance in the city of small businesses and retail, we did a retail strategic plan. And one of the key recommendations from there was that in order to support our small businesses, we really need to give them some of the tools and learning that larger businesses have already through other corporate avenues, and to help support their ability to be competitive in this rapidly changing world of retail and business, be able to be competitive in a world that is now driven as much by the online endeavors as it is by brick and mortar or real world endeavors. And so we're very excited to have Google be our co-host in this event, and also for folks from both Google and HubSpot for doing presentations that hopefully you will all find useful today. So we want to make sure that we thank our small business, our business associations, who are also, in addition to city's economic development group, they are also your first point of contact. Some of the business associations will be here today, so you'll probably run into executive directors from the area business associations. I know Cambridge Local First is here. And I also want to say thanks to the Chamber of Commerce, who are hosting a networking event after this. So in addition to what learning you get here from the speakers, I think there is much to be gained and learned from each other's experience. So the peer-to-peer connection, hopefully that can be fostered in the more relaxed after work events that the Chamber is organizing. So I just want to say thanks to them as well. And with that, I'm going to introduce to you our mayor, Mark Mcgovern. Mark is a lifelong Cambridge resident and a supporter and patron of our local small businesses. So, Mayor Mcgovern.
Thank you, Aram. As much as well, good morning, first of all. Good morning. As much as I love taking credit for things that I had little to do with, I really, a few people this morning have said, thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, for doing this. And I really didn't do a whole lot. I really have to thank Aram and the Economic Development Department of the city, not just for putting this together today, but for everything that they do and making me look good. So I appreciate that. Yeah, clap for them. So I also want to thank Google, one of the largest companies in the world, for hosting us today. Also for other things that they do in the community to support businesses and just to support the city in general. I just returned from a national school board conference, and you get to talking with as the mayor, I chair the school committee as well, and you get to talk with other elected officials from around the country. And when you start engaging in those conversations and you start telling them all the things that we're able to do in Cambridge, because of our commercial tax base and what that brings to the city, the Cambridge delegation has to kind of leave through a secret tunnel to get to the airport because everyone is so jealous of all the great resources that we have in the city. So I really do appreciate it. I also want to really thank the small businesses in Cambridge because we ask a lot of you, just within the past few years, whether it was banning plastic bags or polystyrene or raising the age to buy cigarettes to 21, which impacted a lot of our convenience stores. These are all social values that in the community and the council pushes forward, but at the end of the day, it really falls on the shoulders of small businesses to figure out how to maintain their business and balance all of those social values that we ask you to balance. So I really do appreciate your cooperation and your willingness to work with us as we really lead the way in so many different areas. So we have over 300 small businesses in the city, and our small businesses give Cambridge the character and the vitality that make us such a unique place. Whether they're family-owned businesses that have been owned for generations or ones that opened just within the past year, they're crucial to our thriving commercial districts. With the council's support and funding of programs like the Small Business Challenge and the Storefront Improvement Program, we're able to help small businesses grow and thrive through grants, educational workshops, and technical assistance. In turn, many small businesses become pillars of support in the community for their willingness to give back to the city they love, whether that is through sponsoring youth sports teams or whether that's through other charitable organizations, or really I've had incredible experience bringing in young people from the city who need work, and small businesses are always there to step up and hire locally and hire local Cambridge kids, and that is so important to us as a community. So I'm not going to take up too much time, but I just want to say that I'm really grateful to all of you and all the small businesses in the community. You do have the council support, even though we do ask a lot of you. I'm going to introduce the city manager, who is also a lifelong Cambridge resident, and who, although he's a Yankee fan, is a really great guy, and is really always there to step up and support the business community. So again, thank you so much. We're actually going to have to leave relatively early because we're looking at hopefully saving some artist space in the city, which again wouldn't even be a conversation that we were able to have if we didn't have such a thriving commercial tax base that we have. So we thank you very, very much. And without further ado, our city manager, Louis DePasquale.
So I also just want to say good morning and really thank you. First of all, to the mayor and the elected officials in this city who really, really support and understand the importance of small business and make sure that we're listening. And I want to thank community development for their effort. This is an important part of what makes the city run, and we have to listen to you in order for us to do our job better. So please, when in doubt, let us know. And I also want to recognize the deputy city manager who's played a key role in this, Lisa Peterson, who's here with us today. So I really think when it comes to the business community in the city of Cambridge, it's a partnership, and we learn from each other. And I think if you've heard from Aram and the mayor, this really is a team effort, and we're all in this together. And you know, we do a lot of things, and you do a lot of things, but that doesn't mean we do them all perfect. And the way we can learn is from having communication and talking to one another, and understanding that we are listening to one another. And I can tell you that we have done some things in this year's budget coming up in July. You're going to get a preview before it even goes to the council. That's in direct correlation to listening to what you have asked for. You know, I'm very pleased to announce in this year's budget, we are going to have for 150 small businesses a twice-a-week free business recycling collection program. That's because all of you asked for it, and the council supported it, and now we're here to do it. And that's what I think it's all about. Also, in listening to and knowing how important this is, it's about staff. And as someone who doesn't know my history, I was the finance director and the budget director for a long time before I became the city manager. And believe me, I understand the importance of adding staff, but I also have always been careful to recognize that when you add staff, it means more money that the taxpayers pay, so it's a balance. But this was a no-brainer. We're going to add a new hot person in the economic development staff to work with you to make sure that we're meeting your needs, make sure we're really putting what we said we were going to do with the retail strategy study. So we're in the switcher, and we're going to do that right through the budget, which I think is the best way that we can show how we're in this. The other thing I just want to say is, as I said, someone who's been in finance a long time, I really appreciate what the business community means to us. And I think one of the things that is so important to continue to bring home, and I think this is something for all of you to continue to say because it's the truth, is the fact that the commercial business people in this city pay 2/3 of our property taxes. And we can talk about how great our residential tax bills are and how well we're running the city to let that happen. But the real secret is the fact that the commercial businesses are paying 2/3 of those taxes. And that's something that we need to bring home, and that's something that we need to let everybody understand why the business community is so important to the residential community. I mean, we have one of the lowest tax rates in the state, and I say this all the time, that if you're a senior in this city and you've bought your property a long time ago, yeah, you're property rich, but your cash has not gone up with the fact that your property is extreme. And we don't want those people to leave, so you ought to have a valuable piece of property. But paying their tax bill is still a challenge. And the way we can keep those people in our city, and the way we can keep those tax bills down, is because of all of you. And it's important for us to recognize that and then show how we can give something back to you. And I think in this budget is an example of that, working together. So we are in this together. We want to continue to work together. I can't thank enough the small business associations who have worked with us. They really are a great representative for you with the city. They are in constant communication with us. And again, we understand the importance that they play in this role. So we will continue to work with them. I want to thank the Chamber, who's been a great partner with us and for having us here. And I want to thank Google because, you know, Google gets it. This is about the 7th or 8th event that I've been at this building. And a lot of them are community events. And they don't have to have community events here, but they want to be part of the community. And I think that's so important. As we're all in this together, the small businesses in places like Google, we are in this together. And it's great to let the residents see what we have in this city because it's so important. So I just want to say thank you for all you do. We are here to listen. And if you have any questions or concerns or things you think we can do better, please let us know because that's how we learn from each other. So now I want to introduce Brian Cusick, our industry director of Google, and again, thank him for all he's done for the city, and thank you all for being here. So thank you very much.
Okay. Good morning. Well, you can say good morning back. That's okay. Okay, welcome to Google. We're thrilled to have you here today. And we're thrilled to have, you know, who's running the city right now, actually? What's going on out there? We're thankful to have you all here this morning. We've long understood the value of small businesses at Google. Excuse me. And how many of you use Google in some way, shape, or form? Okay, so you understand the nature of what we have created to provide tools and platforms for businesses of all sizes to thrive or to succeed or to find ways to interact with customers and communities. By building self-service platforms like we've had, we make it possible for a sole proprietorship, a person working alone, to appear nearly as large, at least in the digital sense, as a Fortune 50 company. And then using various types of sophisticated features within those tools to reach your own business goals and to drive the growth you're trying to drive for your company. We've been doing events with and for small businesses for a long time in a lot of different environments. And here in the state of Massachusetts alone, beyond just these walls and beyond the city lines for Cambridge, there are roughly 37,000 businesses and not-for-profit organizations using Google tools and platforms to drive success for themselves. And obviously with a number that large, that includes an awful lot of small businesses, those types of businesses that really are the engine that drives economic success and provides so many jobs for people. So we're really happy and glad and humbled that we can provide one of the engines for you to drive that much larger engine. In this state alone, in excess of $9 billion worth of commerce has actually occurred through Google. That doesn't mean what necessarily is paid to Google. It doesn't mean at all what is paid to Google for the use of the products or the services. That means transactions or donations, bless you, that have occurred via our platforms. That's an enormous amount of commerce occurring between you, through us, to your customers, or in the case of nonprofits, donations and other forms of fundraising. So we're really very actively involved with that. And as you've heard, we love to make our facility available for the right type of event because we think it's an important part of our engagement in the community as a good community member. But more than the facility, what I'm so happy about today that we can share with you is expertise and insight. If you've looked at the agenda, you know that 4 or 5 of my peers here at Google will be working with you today, either presenting to you or sharing information with you. They bring an enormous amount of expertise to the subject matters they'll be speaking about with you this morning. Whether or not it's expertise in retail as an industry, or whether or not it's using AdWords or other Google Analytics products to help you better understand how you can use the web to drive business success for you. You've got some really impressive expertise coming at you this morning. So I hope you'll engage them. Now, I also think it's very important for them to hear from folks like you what the challenges are that you face as a small business, so that they are better able to do their jobs going forward. So I hope that in addition to engaging them, to learn from them and to maybe ask them questions to better support your business, you actually challenge them. Give them tough things to think about. Give them tough problems to solve with you today, because that would probably be a better outcome for everybody today if we didn't just throw information at you, but we actually shared information going both ways and we both learned something in the course of the day. So I hope you will take full advantage of everything we have to offer you here today. Pay attention, to other events that might be relevant for you that are sponsored by various civic and volunteer organizations. You might have actually noticed, I think on this back wall where your snacks were served today, are art pieces that are here as a result of our partnership with the Cambridge Arts Association, with whom we recently held an event, and we now have art hanging throughout several of our hallways here to support local artists. And I heard you said you were going to be doing more for local artists here this morning. We feel that that's such an important and part of having a thriving community too. That is the various types of creative folks are incredibly important for us to have thriving intellectual and economic success in our communities. So welcome again. Enjoy the day. I hope to get a chance to see some of you during the course of the day. I don't know if I should be introducing Dan or not. Should I? Dan, would you like to come on up? All right, here's your first expert of the day. Start to prepare your tough questions for Dan. He told me this, actually I didn't speak to Dan this morning, but I was going to tell a lie and say he's open for all your tough questions. Please welcome Dan, and he'll give you a further introduction as to who he is and his role here.
Thank you, Brian.
You're welcome. Have fun.
Hey, you threw in the tough part just when you saw me grinning back there. I knew that.
Yeah.
All right, let's make sure we're good. Cool. Let me just test our clicker here. All right. Morning, everyone. Welcome to Google. I want to be the 9th person of all community now. I hope you've gotten settled in and enjoyed our space. I'm curious to know, whose first time is it in this building at Google? Wow, okay, for most of you. Cool, we're excited to have you. We're very proud of our space here. Really glad to share with all of you, and really glad to have you here. I saw the lineup you have of events and speakers. I'm really impressed with the fact that you took time to come here and really learn all this stuff. There's so much to learn. There's so much in this space that we're really excited to talk to you about today. My job today is to provide some context as to why you're talking about the topics you're talking about today, why it's important for you as retailers to give that a big wrapper, and kind of, at the 35,000-foot level, why is this stuff really important? Before I go into that, let me tell you a little about me. I'm a retail junkie. I've been working in retail my entire career in some way, shape, or form. I've been at Google for 2 years, but before that, I was in management consulting for 6. And in there, I worked almost exclusively in the retail industry, working with e-commerce companies, working with brick and mortar retailers, tackling a number of different challenges, whether it's operations, marketing, strategy, product development. Covered a lot of ground within the retail industry. So that's really the entirety of my background. I came to Google, made a pivot out of the management consulting industry into technology, but still keeping retail very much as the focus of my career. So here at Google, I get to work with retailers around what is the information and data and insights that they can use to help their business decision making, whether it be on marketing or a variety of other fields. So I'm going to share some of the insights that we talk to clients a lot about and apply it to some of the context that you might find relevant for your business today. On the personal side, I've been living here in the Cambridge area for about 5 years. My fun fact that I always go to is I've only moved north. So I was born in Brazil, I moved to Atlanta, then to Chicago, then to Cambridge, which I checked is slightly north of Chicago. Not by much. You kind of had to get the little ruler out, but it is slightly north of Chicago. So been here, really happy to be here in this area. Not looking to go any further north, that's for sure. All right, so what am I going to talk about today for the next 60 minutes or so? We'll have some time for questions too. I want to make sure we get you all engaged. But I want to talk to you a little about the state of retail, what's going on today in the industry. Talk to you about what does it mean to be in a mobile-first world, and how the smallest moments matter most to you to thrive as a small business in the retail space. So, state of retail, truths and myths. There's a little bit of myth busting every time you have to go into this, because there's a lot of information out there about retail. There's a lot of misinformation out there about retail, in my opinion. If you focus a lot on the mainstream media and what they're saying, it's pretty much doom and gloom for retail these days, right? A number of bankruptcies, Toys R Us being probably one of the biggest and most recent one that we're seeing, and a number of store closures throughout. I think last year, at the beginning of 2017, Credit Suisse had put out a report saying they expected about 6,000 stores to close across the US, which is a pretty seismic shift for the industry. More than any other point, no other year before then would you have expected to see that much. So that's, the story isn't really pretty if you're going to believe a lot of the stuff that comes out in the mainstream media. But when you dig in a little closer, you start to find nuggets where that's really not so bad, where the story isn't so doom and gloom, where you find, whether it's beacons for optimism or data to suggest, actually, there's a few niches here where things start to work a little bit better. So whether it's specific categories in the retail industry that are doing better, or specific business models that are doing better, or just kind of debunking a lot of the myths around what's going on, there's a lot more really to be said around the state of retail, more than it's doomed to fail because of what you kind of see in terms of store closures and big bankruptcies. So there's been a lot of work to really figure out, okay, what's really going on here? And I'm going to highlight some information from some really recent reports that help kind of dig into some of the data. So there's a lot of information here, a lot of data. That's my background and where I come from, but please pause me if there's any questions. So every time you talk about retail, people typically see, like, what are the big economic indicators that tell me that retail should be doing well or shouldn't be doing well? So because most retail is based on discretionary income, we start looking for signals around things like, okay, what is the median income in the US looking like, and things like that. And the median income, ever since 2011, has actually been on the rise. So you see good signs there, very good rapid growth in the last few years, coming from in the US median income. So that's a good sign. You would think that'd be a good indicator to suggest that retail is in a good spot to succeed when you start looking at this trend. In addition, retail has actually performed better than the US GDP. So the growth of retail has actually outpaced what's going on with the economy at large. So there's actually industries that are actually dragging the economy down, but actually retail is dragging the economy, is pulling the economy up. So you have a very strong sign in terms of the signs of retail that you wouldn't necessarily notice or wouldn't have thought to look at if you just kind of see some of the big headlines. Now, people say, okay, retail's doing really, really well. It's got to be because of Amazon. People, that's the, like, if I had to ask people, like, what's the number one reason they would say why you think retail would be doing well in this day and age, they'd say, well, it's got to be Amazon, right? Huge company, rapid growth, doing a lot of really interesting things. So, and really they are. I mean, you look at where they were in 2005 as a $34 billion company. I say that as a small number. It's obviously not. But compared to where it is today, 12 years later, as a $178 billion company, that's really, really impressive growth. Just in the last year alone, you saw a jump from 136 to 178 billion. Like, this is defying gravity in the business world, right? Like, you just don't see this kind of stuff happening very often. And they are a force to be reckoned with. But in the last year, if the entire retail space grew by 200 billion, and Amazon contributed 42 billion of that growth, it's only 20%. I say only 20% of the growth, right? But there's still 80% of something else that's going on here that we're not picking up if we just think Amazon is the story. So we got to keep digging a little bit deeper. So I told you about the median incomes. That statistic is both very revealing, but also very subjective in a sense, because what it hides is where is that income growth going. So there's a lot to be said around income inequality and what's going on there, but the story is really playing out, right? So we kind of look at the average households for low income, middle income, and high income. We see that the high income demographic has picked up a lot of that growth. So it means that if you're just looking at the average number, what's the median income doing? You're kind of losing sight on where that money is actually going. So there's a big change. You got to really kind of look at that number and really kind of slice it into smaller pieces to really understand what the true story is. So we'll come back to this in a little bit. So a lot of what we kind of see with the doom and gloom story of retail is focused on retailers that are neither super price-based, like the very low discount type chains, or the super premium, higher end of the market. So, and this is actually reflected in terms of how these companies have grown. In the last few years, folks who have been able to, the premier retailers who have been capitalizing on the fact that income growth is going to the top of the pyramid, if you will, they've been very well positioned to succeed in that trend. Very well positioned there, tremendous growth in terms of revenue, a lot of new store openings for retailers who are positioned at the high end of the spectrum. But because the incomes in the lower end are actually getting lower, there's actually been good for the price-based retailers to be positioned with their value. So they're actually capturing a lot of customers that wouldn't come to them before, but because they now have this value proposition that's increasingly compelling to more and more people. So at both ends, the story's pretty good if you're a retailer. The problem is, if you're in the middle, if you're trying to capture a lot of the middle class, if you will, it's been a tough story because now you have fewer and fewer people to sell to, and that's how this is playing out. So a lot of the bankruptcies you'll see, Circuit City, we talk about Toys R Us and several others. They're really, you'll see most of them are going to be these balanced retailers are either price driven or premium. You're going to see a lot of that happening. So that's one trend that helps explain what's going on, both in terms of why is retail doing poorly, but simultaneously doing well. It's also not about just companies that are going online. This is another thing. It's okay, if it's not Amazon, it must be a lot of just the e-commerce movement, a number of other e-commerce companies that are seeing rapid growth. They are seeing rapid growth. There is no doubt about it. But there's still a lot of success that the brick and mortar retailers are seeing, both in terms of how their revenues have grown and in terms of the new stores that they've been able to open. So a lot going on there in terms of brick and mortar that is still a really key to succeed in retail space. A couple other nuggets that come out of these studies that I found really interesting that really gives a lot of, if I were starting a retailer today, I would read this and kind of like shape what my company would look like. Brian's gone. I'm not going anywhere, Brian. Don't worry. But I just kind of thinking out loud here. One of the things that was found in one of these studies is that smaller footprint stores actually do better. So the growth that brick and mortar retailers saw, if they had an average footprint of their store of 10,000 square feet or less, was actually higher growth than if it was over 10,000 square feet. And a few retailers, I know these are fairly large retailers, but they operate with this model of smaller, highly localized stores. You've seen tremendous growth in the last year from companies like Five Below, Francesca's, and Dollar General, partially because some of these are actually some of those price-based retailers that we talked about earlier, but partially because they've really capitalized on this store footprint trend and made it a real competitive advantage for them. What this means, if you're a landlord that releases space to retailers, it changes the game a little bit. So the picture on the left is one of the many malls that have started to really see a demise. The mall sector has been one that's been particularly hit. And on the right, this is the Polo flagship store on Fifth Avenue, New York. They actually closed the store 2 years into a 15-year lease because they weren't able to make the economics work for a store footprint of this size. So if you're a landlord, it means that you have to change your strategy a little bit when it comes to leasing space with retail. It means more smaller stores. It means probably other revenue channels by things like advertising, et cetera. But it's not going to be, I'm going to get a tenant and they're going to be here for 10, 15 years. I'm going to lease all my space to them. That's the model that worked until recently. This is not the model that's really primed to succeed nowadays. And the companies that did start with e-commerce are actually seeing this space. It's an amazing convergence that you see. Companies like Bonobos, Warby Parker, and Blue Mercury all started as only e-commerce companies, actually have made and continue to make the pivot into more and more brick and mortar, but they're doing so in very select ways, right? So if you look here in the middle of the Warby Parker store in Cambridge, not too far from us, small store. The store is a showroom, not a lot of space in the back, right? Very compact space to give you the consumer the experience that they want, but at the same time, also kind of capitalize on more of the showroom idea without having to be super stocked, et cetera. The interesting thing is that Bonobos and Blue Mercury started as e-commerce companies, went into the brick and mortar space, and have since been acquired by brick and mortar retailers. So Bonobos was acquired by Walmart, I think it was last year. Blue Mercury acquired by Macy's in 2015. So now you've got the brick and mortar companies noticing this trend. They're not going straight to the e-commerce. They're going to these e-commerce-ish companies that are also playing in the brick and mortar space. There's amazing convergence of the e-commerce world and the retail world who have capitalized on some of these trends to really, because the answer isn't one or the other. The answer kind of turns out to be a blend of e-commerce and brick and mortar to make retail succeed for these companies. So some really interesting trends recently popping up here with companies that are taking a very fresh approach to retail. So even with all e-commerce and the presence of digital and things like Google, 87% of sales in retail still happen in the brick and mortar store. That's easy to forget when you see things like Amazon and all these new e-commerce companies. Like, there's still a lot happening in the store. Yes?
You
For this particular definition, it does not include retail auto sales. Yeah, good question. This is more, apparel, or it'd be general merchandise, et cetera. Yeah, so you see 87% of retail sales happening in the store. And that's good news, right? Because if you're positioned as a brick and mortar retail, you still have a lot of value to having a store. But how people are getting to your store and how they're prepared and their research, it's happening well before they get to the store. So 77% of all retail sales are influenced by digital, and 50% are actually influenced by mobile specifically. So people coming to your store knowing what you carry, what's the price, what they should be comparing it against. Oftentimes, it's just the last sanity check of, how's the fabric going to sit on on me, or how is this going to look versus the pictures on the website, that kind of thing. So you see, there's studies that say there's a lot less foot traffic these days, but it's a lot more empowered. Like the average time that someone spends in the store is shorter because they're more empowered with information ahead of time. So there's a lot going on here in terms of this convergence of the digital and the physical world that's mostly powered by mobile. Let me take a pause there. I've thrown a lot of stats. I'm less interested in you remembering the stats and the information, but more of like, what are the trends and what's the storyline that's going on here? Any questions before we kind of go too much further? Yes?
Are you going to break down more what type of retail is getting this flow?
Yeah, well, I'll definitely show you some sectors within retail where we see a lot of this trend happening.
Do you have any way of dividing up between national and local?
No, so I'm getting to local and small business in a bit, because you're right. I haven't said anything specifically to small business. I'm sure these trends apply, but I haven't said anything specific to small business yet. But we'll get there. And if I haven't answered your question, keep me honest.
Okay.
Yes.
So I understand. You were saying that it's basically lower priced and higher priced e-commerce businesses that are generally succeeding right now, whereas those in the middle are struggling.
That's the general trend. Yeah. So the question was, is it about price, and is price the main factor? It is the main factor. There's other things like experience, right? If you go into a retailer that has a high experience, things like a Nordstrom, for instance, right? Like that's part of the premium versus value positioning. But yeah, it does often come down to price as the main value proposition. Yeah. Yes.
So follow up to that question, do you see though that premium retailer becomes saturated because it's already at 81%? It is reached.
Yeah.
And is there something about trends? So are those fast-moving companies? Some trendy and then.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the question was, is the premium sector of the retail market getting increasingly saturated? This is where I'll go into not Q&A, but Q&O, question and opinion. So every new retailer that's got a small, like the more Bonobos, Warby Parkers of the world, right? I would say those are certainly more positioned towards the premium, and you see a lot of turn of like new venture capital investment activity happening with that premium niche retailer space. Where is the ceiling on that saturation is really hard to tell. We're probably getting close to it, but I think we'll probably see a lot more people try to crack in on that side of the marketplace rather than the other side. Yes?
So 20 years ago, well, in the 90s, they were predicting that digital buying was going to completely get rid of everything. Disintermediation, everything was going to be gone. Now it's 87%, it's still small. What's the rate of change? It's obviously huge if it's still 87%
Mhm.
small business. But is the rate of growth changing, slowing, plateauing?
Yeah, so 80%, 87% isn't necessarily small, but it's happening in stores. So it could still be in big stores, but it's in brick and mortar retail, within the walls of the store. It's changing somewhat quickly, but not too quickly. It was a small base not too long ago, right? So that's part of the issue. For a long time, the number was 92%. Now we're 87%. So it's significant enough to kind of keep a movement in terms of like what's going on and keep an eye on this. but it's not, it's not the most immediate threat to brick and mortar retail. I think you'll continue to see more and more. I think what wasn't expected from the people who saw digital coming on is that I think the mentality there was more binary, right? People were either going to buy online or they're going to buy only in store the way they used to. The reality is they're buying both ways, right? Or they're using digital to come into the store. So that's I think what a lot of people who saw the internet and mobile kind of like, they jumped to this state that hasn't really played out in the same way they expected to. They just kind of converged. I thought I saw a hand back here. And I'll last question before we go on. Yes?
Are these data also location-based? Because I'm looking at, went to Florida this Christmas, and I'm seeing Walmart and all these stores like packed back. But I'm in Massachusetts and Boston, I don't see that same traffic. So when we say retail, are we looking at certain locations, or do we ever break down?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I haven't seen a breakdown. This is US level data. I haven't seen a breakdown of what specific regions. I think you're right, though. I mean, you're definitely going to see some regions that are more affected by these economic trends versus others. Because I think there's something there. I haven't seen the data that backs that up, but I think your hypothesis is pretty spot on. Yeah, cool. I'll take another pause for questions a little bit down the road, but I want to keep us going so we don't run into your other speakers down the road. So, gentleman here asked a question, what about specific sectors of retail? How do we see this going on? So we do a lot of things at Google, but I think what we're known for the most is search, right? Our search engine. And we're able to really kind of gather a lot of signals around intent. What are people thinking about? What are they, what's really top of mind when you see some of the major query trends in terms of what they're actually typing in the search box. So here's a number of different verticals within the retail space. And you can see that they all experience a pretty good amount of growth in the last year or so. But most of that growth has actually come from mobile. So mobile queries are actually where we're seeing more and more people going in, typing in intent, even if it's something that is very commercially driven, like, oh, I need the new Nike shoes, let me type that in, or something more like, how do I tie a tie, right? Like both of those kind of instances, commercial and non-commercial, are seeing tremendous growth on mobile. And you see here that the growth on mobile far exceeds the growth of all of these query trends on all the different verticals here within retail. So quite a bit of interesting trends where people are going more and more mobile. Now, going to small business, Google and Ipsos kind of launched a survey, I think it was concluded last year, where surveyed thousands of small businesses all across the US and asked very, very simple questions around how do small businesses think about digital? How do you think about the role of digital for your growth, and how does it play in with your consumer, et cetera? So some of the results here were really interesting. 52% of small businesses in Massachusetts agree that being online helps their business grow. Of all the states that were included, Massachusetts was actually the third lowest with this number, which surprised me. I was not expecting to see that. I was expecting to see Massachusetts being one of the highest states. Now, if you're here, I'm guessing you're not in the 52%, right? You're probably in the other 48%. Sorry, I'm guessing you are in the 52% that agree that that digital is important for your business. But overall, your peers, compared to other states at least, don't necessarily believe in the power of digital as much as in other states. 76% of small businesses in Massachusetts have an online presence. That was actually one of the higher ones, which is good. 68% of small businesses in Mass have a company website. 23% of small businesses in Mass have a search engine listing or a map listing that their business manages. So, and that number again, the 23% around the search engine listing was one of the lowest across various states. So I don't know. Does anyone remember taking this survey? I know there was a lot of small businesses included. Any hands? Yeah. Okay. A few. Yeah. So really interesting. I was shocked at some of the numbers. I've always seen Massachusetts as a beacon for digital and innovation and a lot of things, but it's not really playing out, right? There's a lot of companies that haven't kind of taken on that same stance. So hopefully, by you having an interest in digital, you'll see this as a source of competitive advantage as you try to get positioning your business for success as well. Okay. So we talk a lot about a lot of stats, a lot of information around what's going on with digital, kind of breaking it down to more specifics within retail, specific verticals, going into a little bit of small business. And we talk a lot about the power of mobile, right? So at Google, we talk a lot about being mobile first. So mobile first to us means a lot of different things. But when we take a stance of, okay, how does our user think? Is our user mobile first? We're drawn to things like this, right? People starting off their day. For a lot of people, this is probably a familiar scene to a lot of people, either turning off their alarm or checking their email. First thing, eyes open, right for the phone, right? And it's hard to avoid. We rely on these things for so many different activities. And but yeah, so this is the reality of what being mobile first is. To us as a company, we made a big shift a few years ago where when we say mobile first, it means we make products for mobile before we even make them for desktop. That wasn't always the case, right? The internet of the late 90s and the early 2000s was desktop first. Now the behavior isn't there, so we started shifting completely how we think about mobile. So whenever you see changes to Google search engine, things like that, chances are you're going to see something, pop up on mobile differently, and then we'll filter that into desktop. And that's a big mind shift change that we've had to undergo as a company because our users undergo the same change. And it's not just kind of rolling out of bed, right? We see how mobile's changed everything. So we've seen a lot around different uses for mobile, and we're going to talk a little about that in a bit. But we see mobile influencing things like social media, or how most social media users are actually entirely on mobile and not necessarily on desktop anymore. We see the influence on mobile for transportation, for commercial activity, for a lot of different things. So it's kind of gone to different what we would call use cases, right? Different mindsets of what consumers are doing on mobile. It's permeated nearly all of them. So how many searches are on Google? Well, it's in the trillions now, right? The number is massive every year, and it grows very quickly, and you saw what the growth numbers look like for retail. There's trillions of searches made globally on Google every year, and that number grows faster and faster. The one cool thing that isn't on the slide necessarily, but there's actually a little posting outside in our little cafe about this, is that every day, 15% of the searches that Google sees are searches that Google has never seen before. So it's newer and newer searches that we're not used to seeing because people are thinking differently. They're using search for something that they never thought of using it before, or asking it in slightly different ways. But it's made our job really interesting of trying to understand intent and context to provide the right information by always adapting to what consumers are thinking. So of the trillions of searches, more than half of that is now coming from smartphones and tablets. So that's true for us as a search engine. That's also true for a lot of the biggest retailers that we work with, is that most of their traffic is now coming from smartphones and tablets, not so much from desktop anymore. But when people do have, when smartphone users do have a moment of need where they're looking for information or looking to browse the internet, 90% of them, or almost 90% of them, are going to search first, right? So that's how they're using, that's how their behavior is translating. They're not necessarily going directly to a site. They're using search to find what they need, and from there, navigating on their journey. So, okay, so if we kind of recap where we've gone so far. We talked about retail, we talked about technology, we talked about what was going on in terms of retailers who have succeeded using digital in a very specific way, and how mobile has been the biggest factor in how those retailers have gone, right? 50% of retail being influenced by mobile. So hopefully I've convinced you that mobile matters and that mobile is important. But when we forget to capitalize on that, we have to understand a little bit more around how mobile is being used, what's the mentality that people are using it with. So we're going to dig into that. And to illustrate that, we've got a little video. So if Jeremy, you could cue up the video for us. lot of chuckling when the snow shoveling portion came on. I personally got much more freaked out. What I didn't cover in my intro is I have a 4-month-old baby, so the where do I even start moment is like every day of my life right now. But yeah, I mean, so I'm sure a lot of these moments are super relatable to a lot of you, right, in your personal lives. There's a lot of, we saw a lot of scenarios here that were both very personal in nature, right, and a lot of that were like a lot more business in nature, like I need to buy something or how does this work and that kind of thing. And mobile is kind of permeating into all of those different use cases. So, and the key thing that makes mobile so important and so relevant and so useful to businesses small and large is the combination of context and intent. So, so for instance, if you are, so I'll pick on one of these examples, right? Or I'll give you a different example actually. So I was really curious with one of my colleagues, if I asked Google, where do the Giants play, right? Well, am I talking about the New York Giants? Am I talking about the San Francisco Giants? How is it going to trigger a different answer? One of the things that was important in how Google chose to answer me back was where I was physically standing. So if I did the search in San Francisco, it told me that I had to go to the ballpark, right there on the water. San Francisco. It was thinking San Francisco Giants. A colleague of mine also in San Francisco did the same thing, but he lives in New York and he's a Giants fan. So from looking up various scores and things over time, Google was able to say, okay, all right, hang on a second. This person says Giants. I see Giants just down the road at the ballpark, but they're thinking about New York Giants. So really interesting combination of context and intent coming together to bring the most relevant information in a much more individualized way. I think sometimes people assume, oh, if you type in something in Google, everyone's going to get the same answer. It's not always true because we're always trying to make the information more and more relevant and take away pieces of, disentangle a lot of ambiguity to help bring the best information forward. So of all these different use cases around mobile and how does it apply, you can characterize it in a number of different ways. I think one framework that I think helps group them internally when we talk about this stuff is there's an I want to know moment, right? I'm seeking information. I want to go, right? If I need to solicit transportation or there's somewhere I want to be, that's definitely a big area where people are using mobile for. I want to do, right? I kept talking about the baby stuff. This morning I had to figure out how to take the base of the car seat out of the car. I couldn't do it. Watched the YouTube video that Google took me to. It helped out, which is good. So several different I want to do moments and I want to buy, right? So even the commercial point of sale kind of use cases are very much manifested in mobile as well. So, so to succeed on mobile, right, the recipe is actually pretty simple, right? Once you have to think at the user behavior. What are users thinking about doing, right? Think about your own personal experiences on mobile, and how do you apply that to your business? The secret really isn't that secretive, really. It's it kind of boils down into 3 distinct pillars, which are be there, be useful, and be quick. So being there are things like, having a search engine listing, things like that, right? Like allowing Google to have the information around, okay, my store is located here. I can be found on things like maps or on things like the search engine. So when someone's searching for mobile, because location is such a relevant and rich determinant of intent, right? You as a local business are really well positioned to capture some of that. So the first thing is very simple. It's just be there. Second is to be useful. So what that means, if we unpack that a little bit, is building content for real needs, right? And that can be if someone's in a I want to know moment and you have information to provide around providing information, that's great. But if someone's in a I want to buy moment, providing easy ways, seamless ways for them to do that is going to be more important. So think about what your user comes to you for. Is it information? Is it purchasing? Right? And back out of there to realize what's the content that you need for the real needs. Connecting online to the real world, I think, is super important. A lot of this comes down to things like location and knowing your location. It comes down to there's even products that help support, okay, if I'm looking for something online, can I find the store, and can that store tell me that this product is in stock, and how far away is that, right? It's just like solutions like that that help kind of connect the physical and the online world. And the third is optimizing for mobile. So mobile web pages haven't gotten a lot of love in a lot of time, and sometimes you see pretty bad examples where you're, the example now is scrolling like this. Back in the BlackBerry days, it was like that, right? But in both situations, you see examples where pages aren't really looking good on mobile, where it's not a good reflection of what you want your customer experience to be. So there's a long way for mobile pages in general to go. But I would suggest, if I were building a web page for my fictitious retailer today, I think I would do it on mobile first and not on desktop. The third pillar is be quick, right? It's just, people don't have a lot of time. You saw the whole narrative around how people use mobile is micro moments, right? There's not a lot of time where you can gain or lose a potential customer. So being fast and frictionless is important. Testing your site. We have a free tool that people can just type in, what is your website, and it tells you, is it fast? How fast is it to load? How does that compare to other companies, that kind of thing. So it gives you a lot of suggestions on how to make your site faster, which actually there's a lot of easy ways to do that. It's not like you don't need a team of 100 engineers to do it. There's like a lot of easy ways to do it. And making improvements. So always testing user experience, things like that, and making sure that you've got a pretty good mobile experience that people can reflect. So any questions there? I'll take a quick pause. Yes, in the back.
Is that free tool to test your website?
Very good. Let's see. Did I leave it in here? The free tool is testmysite.thinkwithgoogle.com. Yeah. So you can type it in. It actually kind of breaks down even how long did it take for the first thing to load on the page? How long did it take for the page to fully load? It gives you like very interesting examples of some insights. It kind of says, okay, is this good, and is it better than your competitors? That kind of thing. So some interesting tools to use there. Any other questions? Okay. All right. So we're a little bit ahead of schedule. Yeah, question, go ahead.
I did have a question. I find it hard to test my website just because I'm so close to it, and I ask people, and people want to be polite. What are your suggestions in terms of actually getting really good feedback on what your customers are looking for?
Yeah, it's customer feedback's tough, right? You always get the really good and the really bad, but where the truth somewhere lies is kind of hard to capture. One thing that one of my clients told me is, I, as a business partner, right, as a vendor of theirs, they trust my feedback much more than they do their customers. So maybe try thinking about people who are your business partners, your vendors, et cetera, who have a vested interest in your success, but who aren't going to paint such a rosy picture sometimes. So that's one thing that stuck with me that I would try next. Yeah. Question in the back.
Yeah, I've actually found that it's hard to get customers to read on the, so if they have a lot of questions that need to be answered on the website, we've actually had to go to pings on all of our email addresses and say, go to the website, go here, read this, check, choose your options. We can't confirm your order until you've chosen all your options and that kind of thing. So do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah, so the question was, it's hard to get customers to read and spend a lot of time, right? And it's true. Like, I don't mean to mock the question. It's totally true. People have very short attention spans, especially when presented with a tiny screen, right? It has to be quick. There's a lot of things, without digging into like the super specifics of your situation. There's things around like, if people have to fill out a lot of forms, like including technology that helps autofill forms, right? If they have to fill out paperwork and you see, okay, I start typing in DAN, it's asking for my name and my address and stuff like that, right? Like applying some of these things is important. If there are options within your site that are the most standard, maybe give them away as defaults, right? Like here's the default option for this product, and you would typically choose these 3 checkboxes, but not these last 2. If you have to make a change, go from there, right? Things like that. It's all about thinking through, because that's where we see a lot of, like if it's a website that's trying to drive sales, for instance, like drive an actual purchase, most of the drop off either happens at the very beginning, like with things like the page not loading, or at the very end where, man, it's just really hard to fill out all this information and stuff like that. So, so the reading portion there is, I would challenge you to think around like what's the minimum amount of things that people need to read to give me the information that I need to take some action on. I think people don't mind necessarily being followed up with over things like phone and email if they're very specific around, I need these 3 very specific boxes checked, right? Or whatever the case may be. But yeah, it's a huge challenge. Like this is the more and more nuanced the product and the retailer and things like that, you really kind of have to think through what's the amount of detail that I really need versus what can I do away. So I'd love to pick your brain after the session around like what are specific examples that you're thinking of, because it's it's really hard. It's just a challenge that everyone's always testing and iterating ways to minimize the amount of friction that their customers go through. Even by a little bit makes a huge difference in terms of business results for these clients. Other questions? Yeah, in the back.
To rewind to earlier, you had stipulated that like I think 87% of brick and mortar interactions were driven by digital stores.
Mm-hmm.
50% of that was from mobile. Does that include, say, I know that I want to go to Sears and I know that what I want to buy is at Sears and I know that not through any digital means just because I know because I've been there before, whatever it might be. But then I search for the address. Does it include that, or does it just include I need a hammer and then the internet tells me that's where I get it?
The latter. So it wasn't. It's not so much give me the address for Home Depot. It's more like I need something from Home Depot, or I need a hammer, or I need, or does Home Depot carry the hammer? It was more of that kind of questioning that went into this. If it was just I need to get from point A to the Home Depot, it was less focused on that. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
To kind of follow up off of her question pertaining to like website attention span, I guess my question is, in terms of incorporating videos, I guess what would you recommend in terms of someone's attention span for even that aspect?
Yeah, so this is incorporating videos and websites while also keeping the experience fast and seamless. So the recommendation that we typically talk to retailers about this stuff is, if the video doesn't have to be front and center, the first thing that people see, then load it last on the page, right? It's like, get them to start seeing that there's something loading on the page, right? So they're not like, oh, this page isn't working or whatever. Get them to see something, like the header, get them to see the menu, things like that. And then as more information populates, then populate your video. The same thing with images, right? People use a lot of like really rich, really beautiful imagery on their websites. And on mobile, it becomes a huge challenge for page loading. So there's a lot of very simple, you can take a couple of different approaches on it. Like where do I have it on the page? And then how do I load it on the page? How do you load it on the page is a bit more of like an engineering challenge. It's like, I need this snippet of code to go down here instead of up here, right? It literally goes down to something like that. But this experimentation around what do you need to load first is the most important to get people to stay engaged with your page. And if you can afford to have your video come in a little bit later or your imagery come in a little bit later, I think you'll find a good balance between getting the video on the page the way it needs to be, but also not having it kind of clog the user experience. Yeah. Yeah. Yes?
Is there any place that we could find locally for our, just the small business local trends and things like that, where you have it locally now?
Yeah.
Google's in Cambridge. Is there any tools that we can utilize within Cambridge or local area?
Yeah. I think Partnese is going to talk a little bit about the local trends in Cambridge and what's going on in the next session. So I think she's much better positioned than I am to.
That's right now, but like for forecasting.
I see.
Things like that. Like it's great Partnese and those guys are fabulous with stuff. But if we wanted to look at something like right away, like in the local area, is there anything such a tool that we
and then narrows it down to Cambridge.
Or just around our area.
Yeah, I don't know if it gets that specific. I think you can. I mean, there's literally a tool called Google Trends, which you look at. Okay, if I want to look at like put in a term like fashion, right? And it tells you is that term jumping off the page or not. I think you're able to narrow down trends for terms like that specifically to Massachusetts. I don't think you can go into Cambridge specifically, but it might be a way to get a little bit closer to what you need. Yeah. Yes.
With the sort of innovation of things like Alexa skills, all these speaking interactions with technology, do you see any possibility, or is Google thinking about in the next several years of developing approaches to marketing that basically don't even involve visual interaction with technology at all?
Yeah.
Is Google thinking about that?
Absolutely. So I talked about the shift to mobile first, and now the shift we're trying to make, it's still relevant to that, but it's what does Google look like in the age of assistants, right? So you probably, I don't know if you've seen like heard of our Google Home product, which is you say, I'm not going to say it in case it triggers, okay Google, okay hoo-ha. And then you ask a question and it spits back either an answer or something to your phone that says, oh, I've got an answer for you, it's on your phone. The question now becomes, how do we incorporate that in both in the Google Home product, but also on the phone, and really kind of provide either voice-to-voice interactions or voice-to-visual interactions, or even yet, right? If there are certain patterns that people are seeing, how do you try to anticipate what people need before they need it, right? So now I get around 5 or 6 o'clock every day, I get something that just pops up on my phone and says traffic to your home is bad. It's going to take you a long time, right? So that's an assistant that's actively working, not just to react to what you have to provide or questions you have to ask of it, but to proactively bring things forward to you. So like this whole shift of assistance is like the biggest, is like the next big pivot that we as a company are trying to make. And all these questions around how do we be more proactive, how do we be more intuitive with our users is going to be critical, I think, in that transition. So there's a lot more to come. I think you'll start to see more and more of it in our products, both in terms of consumer products and as well as what you as businesses can use. But that's the next big question for us. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yes.
I think it's definitely an opportunity to, what she said, bring more localized information. I know Google is very good to providing relevant information.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, if I'm in Patriot country now asking about the Giants, they should tell me that the information is irrelevant.
Yeah. Yeah, we try not to, try not to offend anyone, but, I personally agree with you. But yeah, it's, I think the answer to making it irrelevant would be, okay, if I'm asking about the Giants, there's got to be something else that you mean besides the New York Giants, right? And let's try to figure out what that is. Yeah, I think you're right. Like, I think it's a good challenge around how do we make more local information more relevant. I'll have to do some more digging to figure out if there are other resources that are just like not coming to mind as far as things that could help, and I'll make sure we can get that back across. But yeah, I'll think a little bit harder about that one. One in the back, and then we'll come here. Yeah.
I believe the product's called Google Answers, where you can get a box that's the same for something like, where do I get a hammer? It'll pop a box at the top with a sort of canned answer that is found on the sort of website. Is there a way for local business to interact with that so that our version of that answer can be found locally, but not nationally?
Definitely. I think you've got some speakers later today that are going to talk about specifically this challenge, so I don't want to steal too much thunder from them, but they're going to help all around, like, okay, if these are the trends, if this is where the world's going, right, how to use a small business then like take advantage of that to really kind of capitalize on it. And they'll be more specific around things like setting up your website, setting up your AdWords for any kind of like media, things like that. So that's going to be, I think that'll be a good time to kind of put a real fine point on that question. Yeah, one up here.
I guess just curious, I know you guys have so many great tools out there, but I'm always finding them out like in pieces, like when talking to people. Do you have a central repository or like website that you can go and see everything you guys have? Or?
Is there a central repository to find out all the things that Google has? No, there's not one.
Is there a search engine that could help?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, it's actually a good question, right? Like, what are all the things that Google has? I wonder what the answer would be. Like, I've never tried that one, but I don't know. It might be pretty crazy, but yeah, it's our stance of this stuff is, we've got, we hire incredible engineers who cook up some incredible stuff, and who love the autonomy to do all this stuff. So it's always coming out in different places, and we want to get it out in people's hands and get them to use it and get them to test it and get them to, get us to improve it based on some of the feedback, which is great. I think it's the right direction to go. But I think sometimes that comes at the trade-off of things like organization and centralization and stuff like that. So it's hard. I think it's really hard, I think, to kind of get your grasp on. I work in the company. I don't think I have a great sense sometimes of what it is. So I'm always researching stuff, and I learn about it either through internal channels and external channels. It's all about kind of keeping your ear to the grindstone there. So I wish it was easier. I totally hear you on that because I'm a person who thinks, central first. But yeah, it's just not the way us and a lot of tech companies really operate. Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder if you found any stats on sort of the impact of mobile on small businesses. I know from speaking to various small businesses that sell products, some that also provide service and sell a product, that one of the challenges is people coming in, looking at the product, taking advantage of the services, and then going and buying online. And so wondering sort of how mobile has impacted.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I think you're right. I think there is a lot of. I think there are situations where that's what you described basically called showrooming, right? Someone comes in your store, doesn't treat it as a place to transact, but more of as a place to see the product and go buy elsewhere. I think that's definitely a trend that's happened either because of mobile or because of Amazon or because of more competition, whatever the case may be. But I think for every time you'll see something like that, you also see a situation where a consumer comes in much more prepared and empowered and knows exactly what they want, when they want it, how much is it going to cost. They just want to buy it in store because they need it that day, or they want it to see, touch the product, just to feel, get one more sanity check on whether or not that's what they really want to buy. Then the stats in general are very similar for small and large businesses in terms of the influence of digital and the influence of mobile more specifically. But I think the teasing out the specific situations that you described around the question you're really asking is, am I in the right end of the shift here, right? Like, am I getting an advantage from this or a disadvantage of this? And I think the answer is it's going to depend on the business model. So it's going to come down to whether or not just digital or mobile in general, but is your store well positioned to capitalize that and keep someone in the store, and keep someone, are they going to be able to find the information that they want in your store, but also the compelling enough price or offering that they want? So yeah, it's hard. There's a lot of different trends going on and culminating at once. Mobile and digital is there and here to stay. But fine tuning how does mobile and digital play a role in that specific situation is very nuanced. So I haven't seen a lot of stats that describe the question that you described. But it's really got to come down to how does mobile fit your overall experience in your retail experience. Yeah. We actually have there's a handout in the back. I won't go over it now, but we talk about these different micro moments and how people think about using mobile and how it reflects what they're trying to do. There's actually a really interesting worksheet in the back that helps you think through, okay, it's just a way to force you to think through, okay, what are customers thinking about? How do we act on it? What does it mean for things I need to have in my store or things on my mobile page, for instance? And it kind of forces you to think through, okay, in a world where attention spans are small and we have to be fast and frictionless, what do I have to do better, right? And I think I think you'll find some value from that and kind of thinking through that exercise, in addition to the coaching you'll get today from the experts on various different things. So I'll close by saying just a few things, kind of recapping some of the stuff we talked about. I think if you don't have to remember all the stats. I know some of you have already picked up on some of the stats that we talked about, but I think the 3 takeaways from today: retail isn't doomed, right? It's just changing, and it's changing very, very quickly. So keeping an eye on that and constantly testing and iterating and trying new things that kind of culminate the intersection of what you have to offer as a retailer and what technology to bring to you is important, because it's always going to keep changing. Digital provides a level playing ground for retailers small and large, right? Like if you want to look for your hammer, right, through mobile, and if you're there and you've got your retail, you've got your retailer set up to provide an experience, you've got an equal playing ground, right? Things like branding and having to spend so much on TV, and for instance, just to have a brand so that someone knows to go to Home Depot instead of going to a smaller, more local store. Digital's provided more of a level playing field, and it provides a lot of advantages for small retailers to compete with large retailers. Your customer is mobile. You know, they're mobile in different aspects of their life. They transact on mobile. They live on mobile. They probably do too much on mobile. But you can win there, right? It's all about being relevant, by being there, by being useful, and by being quick. So I hope that helps set the stage around why you're going to be talking about some of the things you're talking about later today. And yeah, I hope you have an excellent day. I'm going to turn over to Pardis, who's going to talk about more retail trends in Cambridge. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
So we're actually running a little.
Thanks.
Give everyone about a 5-minute or so break, if that sounds good.
Thanks. Appreciate it. I know. I was excited. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, front entryway. Also, the marketplace is across the hall, and there's a lot of folks in there that would love to hear and see you. So we'll get back started at 11 o'clock just to get back on the agenda. So come back, and thanks, and thank you so much to Dan. That was a really great presentation, and the handouts you mentioned are all on the back table. Feel free to grab one.
Figure like, wow, there are other options that.
The question was, what's going on in the marketplace? There's over 20 service providers and nonprofits that are here to help small business owners, everything from our business associations to other state and local groups.
Yeah, I don't even know what the best way to follow up on something like that would be, but it's a good question. Right. Yeah. All right. Yeah, we can. I mean, it's not a big deal. It's just. Yeah. I was thinking, like, oh, this should be better, but anyway.
Yeah, I'll think about that too.
Okay.
If you find anything, have someone announce it later, or
Okay.
just get feedback.
Yeah,
Trends too.
for sure. Cool.
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna run. See ya.
I'll probably just use one of these.
Oh, you just want to use the microphone?
Yeah. Yeah, just tell me.
Oh, you did? Okay.
She's in the back on that side. Hey, good seeing you, man. All right, thanks, appreciate it.
I wasn't in for the whole thing, but I caught most of it.
Okay, sounds
Seems like
good.
You got some good questions.
No, it was good. They were re-engaged, so that was good. Sure, thank you.
All right.
Cool. You're all day with us?
Yeah, just kind of hanging out.
Okay. All right, sounds good. All right, man. See ya. Hi, how are you? Good. Could I have a latte, please?
Yeah,
Paper. Thank you so much. You too.
I'll still have to double click though, right?
Well, you'll have to click on that to get the house slides to advance, and then you'll have to advance this on your own.
Great, that's easy to do.
Give me 2 seconds, and
And I'm at after parties. Let's see if that works.
yeah, I just want to push it, make sure I'm seeing it.
Yeah, cool. All right, so I'll give you. So basically, all I have to do. So I'll plug in here.
I'm seeing that back there. So.
Oh, right. That's perfect for me. And I can bend down my nose and I can run it off. And then I'm clicking with this guy.
You're clicking with this for the house. If
Forward
this won't.
and backward.
Yep.
And I'll have to click for this on my own.
Yes.
Like that. Thanks, man. That's super helpful. I'm gonna unplug it now, obviously.
Hey, how'd it go?
Good.
Did they ask you?
Oh, all the tough ones.
Really?
Yeah.
Good.
No, it was good. It was a good crowd.
Okay.
Yeah. I almost ran off with the microphone.
Back.
So I think we'll get started soon. Heather. All right. So I'm going to get started. For those that don't know, my name is Pardis Safari. I work at the City of Cambridge's Community Development Department, and I'm going to just give you a brief overview of some trends that are happening in Cambridge. I did want to mention some of the questions, great questions that folks asked the last session regarding more localized data from Google. They unfortunately don't have that. You can look on Google Trends for kind of some regional information, but there's no specific municipality information. So that's not something they can give us directly, but it's worth playing with some of the tools that they have and getting some information through the trends. But let's get started with Cambridge. So I'm going to start first with some kind of a snapshot of Cambridge's demographic and retail market. For those of you familiar with our retail strategy project that we did, some of this may be familiar to you, but it has some more up-to-date data to give you a better snapshot of the past year. So as you can see, the city's population is experiencing steady growth, and it's becoming more and more densely populated in the years to come. The city's population is still remaining young, but it is slightly aging. We have around 42% of folks that are, currently in this year, 42% of folks that are in the millennial group. But it should be noted that millennials will be decreasing over the next few years and advancing to older age groups as they get older. And but they will still remain one of the largest groups in our population as we move forward into 2022. I also want to mention here on this slide the 16% of folks who live in non-traditional group quarters. That's what the census deems as students. So folks that live in dorms, for example, would be in that group. So they're an important group to be part of your customer clientele here in Cambridge with our universities and colleges. So Dan highlighted a little bit on the national level about median household income. So here in Cambridge, our income levels are rising and well above state and national levels. However, as Dan had mentioned too, we're also seeing not a significant, but a large portion of the population in our low income area. So we kind of have that high income and low income gap that we're seeing nationwide. And also interestingly, we are diversifying. We will see between the Hispanic, Black, and Asian populations are all going to be growing and projected to increase between 1% to 3% by 2020. So in addition to residents, obviously, I'll go through this first, sorry. So one thing we wanted to show you is our customer psychographics. So what psychographic analysis tells us is the ability to identify customer groups in Cambridge and describe a little bit about socioeconomic characteristics of these residents. So again, this is just based on residents, not students or workers. So this analysis provides you as a business owner some summary of consumer spending habits, some demographic information about these customers, lifestyle and spending characteristics. So on this slide, we've provided you with what are the top 5 psychographics of Cambridge. Those segments are metro renters, laptops and lattes, trendsetters, urban chic, international market, and international marketplace. And just to dive a little deeply, metro renters is our largest kind of psychographic here in Cambridge. They're approximately 33% of the population. Median household income is around $52,000. Median age is around 32. They're well educated. They may still, for example, be in college, many of them. They use cell phones as a part of everyday life. So they're those mobile-ready consumers that Dan was talking about. They value education and creativity in the arts. So in addition to obviously our residents, a huge part of the population that's important to us is the workforce. And so, as we all know, Cambridge is a huge workforce center. We have a huge employment here in Cambridge. The worker to resident ratio is 1-to-1. And we have approximately, as of the 2012-2016 American Community Survey, so this is census survey, about over 31,000 people working here in Cambridge. And this number, and the reason why we're using it, is because it includes self-employed folks in addition to those working at the private sector. Our two biggest kind of cohorts of industry are professional sciences, scientific and technical service, and then our educational services. So this obviously includes Harvard, MIT, Google, Novartis, and some of our other larger life science and technology companies. So based on this data of the demographics of residents, workers, and students here in Cambridge, Cambridge business owners are positioned to offer a variety of service and products. And kind of to go with Dan had mentioned in his presentation, you kind of can think of yourself as the higher end and, providing opportunities for contemporary, trendy services and items for those with higher disposable income. Or you can think of offering discounts for senior and students and those that are perhaps on don't have as much disposable income on hand. So in addition to kind of the demographics of the city, we also wanted to give you a sense of the retail market and the retail mix of the city. So the largest retail categories currently in the city fall under food service and drinking area, so our restaurants, and also we have health and personal care stores coming in a second. So health and personal care stores, again, would be like a pharmacy or things that in addition to a pharmacy. Then in addition to that, our kind of lowest end of the category or things that we're lacking in the city are what's considered general merchandise. So this might be what we consider a traditional department store. It also includes something like a Target. So even though we have a Central Square Target, it still is general merchandise is still lower on the list of what we offer in our current retail mix. And I also wanted to mention that as of the last quarter of 2017, our vacancy rate is around 2%. Nationwide, that's usually averages around 10%. So we have a great vitality to our retail mix here in Cambridge, and that's probably why some of you have had some sensitivity to higher rents because we have low vacancy and clearly a lot of demand for new retail. No, that's a great question. So the question was, is this based on square footage or maybe like the type of business? It's a little bit of both. The 2% vacancy is based on square footage. This retail mix is based on data that the city has collected on the general mix of the city and what we have on ground floor. What is actually based on data and not square footage is the surplus and leakage. So surplus and leakage analysis offers us insight on how residential spending and business sales intersect. It offers us a deeper understanding to the degree to which local business owners as a whole are spending, are capturing residential spending. So if spending is instead being driven by visitors and employees, that could relate to higher surplus values. When business sales are less than what residents spend locally, this is known as leakage. It means that residents are likely spending a portion of their incomes outside of the defined trade area. So here on this graph, the defined trade area is Cambridge overall. So this could mean, for example, for leakage, residents are shopping online for these items. It could mean they're going outside of Cambridge for these items. And so that may reflect why we have a leakage. In Cambridge, our highest retail leakage points at a citywide level are in areas of general merchandise stores, grocery stores, building materials, garden equipment and supply stores, furniture and home furnishings, and specialty food stores. In Cambridge, retail surplus is found in the categories of food service and drinking establishments, clothing and accessory stores, health and personal care stores. So again, a little similar to what we saw in the last slide. So this reinforces the idea that Cambridge is a regional dining and destination center, and that we have a pretty solid mix and holds its own as a destination for comparison shopping of goods. I want to make note here again, the data that we have, the city has, does not include student data, so those living in institutional quarters. And it also doesn't include new stores that we may know as a community are coming online. So for example, Porter Square will be getting a Target. That's not included in this data. This is just what's currently in the market at the time that we pulled this data. So I just want people to be aware of that. I'm going to hold a little bit on this slide because I know surplus and leakage can be a little confusing. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them at this time. Yeah. Yes, so this presentation is going to be up, and it might already be loaded up on the city's website. Under CDD, we have a retail strategy report page, and this presentation is within the documents of that report page. It's out already, yeah. So we pulled this after the Shaw's had closed. But grocery stores still had, even at the time of Shaw still being open, was still a leakage for the city. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about purchasing trends and habits, some of the stuff that people seemed very interested in when Dan was talking. So speaking of habits, some of the reason why we're seeing that huge leakage in some of the retail goods and service sector in Cambridge is because people are buying online, or they're also looking outside of Cambridge. So in Cambridge, the trends of e-commerce and digital shopping tools are pronounced as 93% of residents in the city have internet at home. And 64% of residents have made a personal purchase online in the last 30 days. So as you can see, based on this graph, that's higher than the national and state average, meaning that clearly people are using the internet here in Cambridge to shop online or at least do that web browsing. So one of the things I kind of want to mention when we're talking about this is that, something that Dan mentioned about being mobile ready. A lot of folks I know, when we help you at different programs, or just producing a web presence, or not even perhaps thinking of being mobile ready. So I hope that one of the key takeaways here is to make sure your website's mobile ready, make sure you have some form of online presence. It doesn't mean you have to necessarily do e-commerce, but you want to be thinking about ways that you can be competitive in this kind of e-commerce / brick and mortar environment that we're in. So some of the questions I've been thinking to myself as we prepare you guys for the next phase of this is, all of you do in-store pickup. This is not a new phenomenon to all of you who are brick and mortars, but I think you need to use the same verbiage that we see these online retailers using. You are the definition of pickup in store, and the better thing is that you can add expertise to that. So we just want you to encourage you to tell that story. Additionally, one of the things I want you guys to be asking yourself when I was kind of preparing for this presentation is the idea of that instant gratification that consumers desire now. So how are you as a business owner able to fulfill that instant gratification of your customer? And additionally, for many of you, is there an option to do buy online, pick up in store? Does anyone do that now? Like have on their website? All right. So, using a Yodel Insights report from 2015, we found that consumers are obviously still shopping in store, and that trend is increasing, but they're also checking their social circles and online reviews to learn more about your products and services. So it's really important to maintain, again, that web presence and stay in front of the potential customers you have. But also, I would really encourage folks to get current customers to review you. That's one thing that Dan reiterated, and I just wanted to as well, is that getting as many reviews as you can on the website and on Google especially just only increases the chances for you to be found. So this Yodel Insight study also found that local business owners are losing out to opportunities to effectively engage with their customers. Specifically, there's kind of three major areas where you're losing communication. Consumers are very interested in receiving what local businesses are sharing around service appointments, so reminding them of appointments or things like that, getting advice from you and tips on how they can improve or what you're doing or your expertise area, and then just general business updates. Maybe you're expanding, maybe you're offering a new service, things like that. They're specifically interested in maybe those three areas. So as Dan mentioned, brick and mortar shopping is stable. He had some studies and graphs about that, and I was looking into a PwC PricewaterhouseCoopers Global Consumer Insights study that showed the same thing, so that's great news. So there's a great opportunity in that, and I think it's mostly because people are looking for those moments to find something unique and share something and have a new experience in your store or with your services. And so, as we mentioned, the way people are learning about your business is changing. Consumers are changing how they find out about things. They're doing it from offline, kind of the word of mouth, asking, do you know who I can get to paint my house? Into, using online tools, even something like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to learn those things. And I also want to mention for those of you in the service-to-service industry, using LinkedIn as an opportunity for you to grow your business in that way is especially important. So in conclusion of that, I just want to mention a couple of stats. So you may have heard in 2016, it was the first year that food spent outside of home surpassed food spent at home. This was a major behavioral change and not just one that's obviously affecting the food industry. We're all busy. We're all wanting to find new ways to spend our limited time with our friends and family. And so it's not surprising that consumers are kind of spending less on products and more on services and experiences. And that's an opportunity for a lot of you in retail. So I know Amazon has been a concern for many. In 2017, the Advocates for Independent Businesses collected data from over 850 independent retailers nationwide. The survey asked a few questions around how independent retailers feel about the effect of Amazon and national chains on their business. Though all those surveys felt that Amazon obviously has had a negative impact on their business, many retailers feel that Amazon is hitting chains harder than independent retailers. Furthermore, in this survey, respondents said that independent retailers are better positioned than chains to navigate this changing retail environment. Independent retailers thought they had distinct attributes that appeal to customers that give them an edge over the national chains. Those are service, community, knowledge, and experience. I'm going to provide a couple examples here in Cambridge of how business owners have used these different attributes. A high level of service, deep and knowledgeable owners and staff, and a track record of helping customers discover new products and services have distinguished independent retailers from chain stores and e-commerce. Think about new ways to promote your expertise in non-traditional manners. So for example, Porter Square Books offers a virtual bookseller service on their website. After taking a quick short form, You receive a personalized list of book recommendations and how to buy those books online from the store. This provides a couple of nice things for the customer. It provides them the ability to do e-commerce, it personalizes the service for them, and they can take advantage of your knowledge here at the bookstore. Tags Hardware, as many of us know, is known for its demos and expert customer service. They combine their expertise of their staff and then bring in knowledgeable folks who specialize, for example, in maybe Cuisinart products, and they bring them in to allow Tags to offer events and activities in the store, but also leverage their knowledge and expertise in their business. So as you can see here, Simply Aaron's in Cambridgeport, it's a salon. They use their social media platforms like Facebook to make quick videos, to offer makeup tips, and also post pictures of their staff getting educated by experts in new hairstyles. New Chapter Home Improvement, who I know is here in the audience, they've been using their Facebook to also highlight before and afters of home improvement projects they've done, as well as just some tips and tools on how to improve the cost. I'm sorry, I'm missing the word here, but kind of just help improving your business overall, your home overall. In regards to community, your customers have a great shared interest and values, and they bring them together, and you can bring them together to provide them a sense of community. It's a powerful advantage that all of you have. We hear a lot about the idea of experimental retail, and I just want to say it doesn't mean providing a new event in your store every week. It also means just providing excellent customer service and unique opportunities to create a social connection between you, your employees, and your customers. So there's many ways that Cambridge business owners have helped build community over the years. Obviously, we know many of our bookstores have had book clubs. Our liquor and beer stores have provided beer tasting and wine tastings. I just wanted to provide some different ideas that folks have used. Gather Here in Inman Square offers stitching sessions, so they can bring folks together who maybe don't want to, knit at home alone, but in the store together. Formaggio Kitchen offers a Cheese of the Month Club as a way to bring folks in and, again, provide maybe a community in a different way. Little Details, it's a new personal organizing store on North Mass Ave. They've been about to offer some classes around 10 trending topics around personal organization, like the Feng Shui. And that brings new customers into the store and helps them provide a new sense of showcase their expertise. And then Longfellow Coffee has their staff coordinator running club that ends every week at the store. Again, it's just a different sense of bringing the community together. So thinking about experimenting with experiences, a lot of you do this already, but I do want to just highlight a couple of different ideas folks have done around the city. You sometimes maybe have downtimes in your business or just trying to find new opportunities to bring in customers. Unlike chains, you have that opportunity to test out in your store and market something new to your active community base. So Mamala's Delicatessen in Kendall Square, they have a kind of a little small storage space that they've kind of transformed into a comedy club that they do for free in the evenings to bring in folks. The Garment District lately has been recently offering ice cream and other socials to just add some new activity while folks are shopping. The South of Porter Square businesses along Mass Ave have been hosting a variety of different holiday and sidewalk sales to activate their storefronts. And as many of you know, East Cambridge Business Association offers a whole variety of events such as Rib Night and the Taste of Inman Square to bring folks along to Cambridge Street that perhaps normally wouldn't. I know many of you already do a lot of these things, but I just want to highlight them as opportunities for you to think about collaborating with businesses in your area. So kind of highlighting a little bit of what Dan said, you've been, and this might go crazy, so I might skip this slide in a bit. Before I end, I just want to highlight a couple of things. I want to thank you all for coming today. I know taking time out of your schedule is very difficult to small business owners. And I just want everything that you're hearing today, just think of it as tools and ideas for helping you kind of grow your business and just using digital to do that. I don't think we're saying that brick and mortar is going away. I think what we're just trying to say is that there's opportunities to use digital to enhance what you do in your stores. Lastly, I also just want to mention the city is here as a resource to you. We provide, as many of you may know, educational workshops and webinars, some of which are recorded in case you're unable to make it in person. We also offer coaching opportunities in marketing and legal and other areas. We also have grant programs that some of you have taken advantage of over the years, and much more. We have a table in the marketplace across the hall that you can learn more about these. But also, in addition to the city departments, we have over, as we mentioned before my presentation, over 20 organizations here to help you, as well as business associations here in Cambridge. So be sure to stop by and learn more. Thank you. Is there any questions? And as I said, the presentation is available on our website, and we're happy to share that with folks too. So I'm going to introduce Jesse Barracon from Graffito Special Projects. He's our next presenter. And yeah, great. Thanks, everyone. Are you using the microphone? Okay.
Hi, everybody. All right. So as I get set up here, I would say it's really exciting to be here for a few reasons. One is I know and like a lot of you. That would be one. And two is I give a similar presentation to landlords that I'm going to give to all of you today, right? So getting there. So this is a far more interesting audience for me to be talking to. And I think the major takeaway, and the reason I bring that up, is that I don't think there's a better time in Cambridge to be a small business owner. And I say that sincerely, despite the fact I'm distracted getting this set up here. But the reason I'm giving this presentation, there we go. The reason I'm giving this presentation to landlords is that they want to do business with you all, right? The market's changing rapidly. I think I popped in for the end of the presentation the gentleman from Google gave. Just the rate of change in the retail segment is changing rapidly. And the businesses that are going to survive are the businesses that can pivot and change. And those are, by definition, the non-formulaic businesses, right? So if you're a formulaic business, you have your model, you have your look, you have your shtick. The market's changing rapidly. You can't pivot and you can't change. And I assume there's nobody in this room who owns a chain business. But that is the reason, in my opinion, that landlords should be doing deals with local businesses. It's not just because it's the right thing to do for social, environmental, all sorts of other reasons that I think we all probably agree with. It actually makes smart sense, right? It makes a lot of sense. So what we do, I spend 60 hours a week thinking about this sort of stuff. So I've got 25 minutes to kind of convey some of it to you all. And I think the first question is probably, well, why is this guy up here talking to us about this? And I think the answer is probably because at Graffito, we're good at some things and we're really good at one thing. And I think what we're really good at is bridging and translating the divide that exists between large institutional landowners, investors, development companies, universities, and hyper-local businesses, restaurants, community organizations, artists. And that is our business. We've been doing it for 10 years and we've had some success. I'm a Cambridge resident. We've worked quite a bit in this city, and really quite excited to be here with you all today. I would also just flag one of the things that is interesting about my experience is that my background's actually working on the tenant side as an attorney doing transactional work for small locally owned businesses. And although we're working now for landlords, it's been a really interesting transition for me, and I think what's driven it really has been impact. So where I want to start today is just with things that we're seeing, and I think that my goal for the next now 23 minutes is how do we help you all understand how to contract with landlords and what are the opportunities out there and what are we seeing on the ground as we're running around out there kind of in our world. And I think one of the things that's interesting, how many of you all either own or are looking to open a restaurant or some sort of business related to F&B, food and beverage? It's actually, okay, that's not as many as I would have thought. So Pardees just shared, I think 40% of the businesses currently, 40% of the businesses currently in Cambridge are restaurants, dining establishments, and drinking establishments. I actually think that number is going to go way up, right? It depends on if we're counting. I think there was a question about is that storefronts or is that square footage? I'm not sure I know the answer to that, but I can tell you that from a storefront perspective, that's going to be way more, and those folks are expanding in this market. The other thing that's really interesting, and there are a bunch of reasons that fuel that. The other thing that's been really interesting to us as a team is that this item number 2, hybrid uses and same space co-tenancies. We are seeing more and more businesses actually share space, and there are certain efficiencies to that. And we are seeing more and more businesses do more than 1, 2, 3, or 4 or 5 things, right? They're doing more. The grocery store conversation is something that is super relevant in Cambridge right now, and I think there was a question about, you know, whether or not the Shaw's number or the Star number was included. The data is misleading. And the data is misleading simply because when you think about combining the reality that more people are eating out, which is a number that Pardees shared, the reality that pharmacies are turning into grocery stores, right? You think about going into a CVS or a Walgreens, they're grocery, right? And look at Target that opened in Central Square. So I think because of this idea that there are more and more hybrid uses, oh, and by the way, restaurants are doing meal replacement, that impacts that number that was like $110 million of leakage. That number is way, way, way less if there is even leakage at all. So I think that understanding, both to our benefit and detriment, the way in which these hybrid uses and the more we're going to start to see physical real estate being shared is really critical. The other thing that's really clear to us in our work is that we have landlords who come to us all the time, and our role is simply, how do we help our clients think about the activation of the ground floor in the neighborhoods in which they're investing in, right? And activation is a very broad word, and retail is one tool. Restaurants are one tool to do that. They talk a lot about urban and Main Street, and we often scratch our heads because, well, you're not on a main street, and you're not really in a city. So what actually are you talking about? And our translation for that code is, I think, and this goes to my earlier point, landlords are realizing the market is changing. Tenants are desiring smaller square footage spaces, right? And there are a lot of reasons that drive to that. One simply that I missed for years, started to think about the size of spaces the tenants need. And for a while, the industry was saying everyone's getting more and more specialized. They need less space. They're getting more focused. And one of the things that we learned from talking to a lot of small businesses, actually one of the reasons they're taking smaller footprints is they don't have the same inventory requirements, right? So think about that. If you were a shoe store 10 years ago, you get one shipment a month of all the shoes you had to sell for that month. Today, it's drop shipped the next day. You don't need to store it. You don't need that basement. You don't need that back of the house. So when people say to us urban Main Street, they're talking about smaller, more storefronts, more of an intimate feel, texture on the ground floor. And I think we can, as a small business community, use that to our advantage. And the last two are super, super important. Corporate culture beyond 4 walls. This isn't relevant in some communities. This is really relevant in Cambridge when you think about where we're all sitting today, which is in Kendall Square. So one of the things we've really been working on with our clients is there's a reason that these large corporations are coming to Cambridge, Massachusetts, right? And there could be a whole nother workshop on this. But one of the reasons is we actually believe that from a recruitment and retention perspective, that young and old people working in these businesses want to be in vibrant communities, right? They want to be in interesting places, okay? That's why companies are moving from, 128 into the city. The next step of that evolution for these companies is realizing, and this is totally at odds, as cool as the coffee bar here is in Google, and I think Google's been a great corporate citizen, the Google mentality is let's keep everyone inside this building. You don't have to go outside and get coffee. You can get it at our great coffee bar here, which is better than any other coffee bar in the city, right? Or so they say. And it is good. But what we're starting to experience and we're pushing our clients on is, hey, why don't you rely on the existing small business community to provide those services and bring people out of these office buildings? Absolutely critical. And those opportunities are opening up. And I think a lot of companies who are coming into places like Kendall Square, who are looking in areas like Alewife, East Cambridge, Cambridge Crossing, Union Square, Brighton, they're starting to realize their greatest strength to create place and community is the existing neighborhoods. And that's something that we think a lot about. And the last one is just trying to process and think through the reality that retail is just one piece of making great place. Seating, lighting, public art, entertainment, wayfinding, programming, these are absolutely critical to creating interesting places. If I was a retailer, and I've invested in my fair share of, for the better and for the worse, retail establishments, the neighborhoods that have this sort of stuff, not just shops and restaurants, that's where I want to go. And we have some of those best neighborhoods in the city of Cambridge that do these things. So when we talk about retail and we talk about opportunities, this is a project we worked on Western Avenue, actually with Harvard. And the traditional view of this is you've got one old building that used to be a dry cleaner. What one use do you put into that building, in that front building next to the food truck, right? When we looked at this piece of real estate, and I would encourage you all to take on this similar approach, we saw 40 different opportunities, right? What can you do out in the parking lot that's completely underutilized? In that back space that used to be a garage, we put in a public radio show. We put PRX in there for a podcast studio. And we've been doing a series of events in the front space. And I think this is the direction the market is headed in. It's actually much better use of real estate in some ways. These buildings will not remain this way forever, but there are a tremendous amount of opportunities that exist in the market where there are enlightened landlords like Harvard who are starting to think about ways in which they can engage the local community to do things to activate their once vacant storefronts that aren't one use or two use, but they're rotating. And that's been something that's really exciting to us. The other thing I'd throw out there is that, there are a lot of different reasons that I think from a small business perspective to experiment. One of them is certainly just the rate change is accelerating, right? So you have to be willing to experiment and to change and to adapt. The other one is about barriers of entry, right? So these are all projects we've worked on. This slide was created for landlords, right? And landlords care about permanence and expense, right? And I actually think the small businesses should care about permanence and expense. You could translate the line at the bottom for expense and just say kind of barriers of entry, cost of starting up. And the two reasons we're seeing folks go really small and go experimental are, well, so I'll call it three reasons. The one main reason is what I mentioned before, which is the rate of change. Things are changing rapidly, right? The other one is you can do a lot in a small space, whether it's the container project at the Innovation Design Building, which some of you may have seen, whether or not it's the pop-ups that happened in Clover's commissary space on Cambridge Street, or some of the pop-ups that we had worked on at 1 Broadway. They're great formats for relatively low investment to experiment with a new business or experiment with a new concept. And we're seeing a lot of folks do this. I think the folks that are being most successful with it, they're actually going in with a purpose. They're saying, I want to learn this about my business. I want to learn this about a neighborhood. And they're extracting data from those experiments that I think are really helping them make informed decisions about, how much money do I spend to build out a space? How does the space have to function? What neighborhood do I go into? How are people going to understand my product? And I think in this world, and I heard both the speakers before me talk about experimentation, I think it's really about experimentation with a purpose. I think that's really, really, really important. And the small businesses who are doing that are rapidly growing. We work with 2 businesses in the market, and we help them with real estate. One started with a food truck. It was Clover, and they started right over here. And they've grown to 8 units now. The other one is Tate Bakery, and they started at a farmer's market, right? And that is still part of their DNA, and they've been able to do what they're doing growing that way. Doesn't mean you all need to have aspirations of opening 8 or 9 restaurants or more, but we think experimentation is something that is really, really critical. And when you're all looking at opportunities for your first shop, or you're thinking about a new neighborhood, we think it is super critical to think about these things. So it's not all about experiments. There are plenty of traditional opportunities to rent space in Cambridge. And that's what we're going to spend the next part of my presentation talking about. So this is either exciting or scary or both, right? In preparation for today, what I did is I tried to look at just 5 neighborhoods, right? 5 neighborhoods where there's going to be more ground floor square footage coming. So I took East Cambridge, which when you combine Kendall Square, First Street, Binney Street, and Cambridge Crossing, 250,000 square feet of new retail space coming to market, all right? Union Square, right across the border, 100,000 square feet. Central Square, call it 20, 25, 30,000 square feet coming. When you look down in Brighton, Alston, between what New Balance is doing and some of the stuff Harvard's doing and a bunch of other developers, call it another 150, 200,000 square feet. Then you go to Alewife, right? So we are talking about an environment where it is already getting challenging because we have a lot of retail square footage on the ground floor, and we're gonna add another 500,000 in 4 years. Right? So how are we gonna absorb that? Especially when ground floor premises are getting smaller. We don't actually have the answer. I think it requires creativity. I think it requires us to think about the ground floor as a canvas for activation, and retail and restaurants cannot solve all of that. They cannot, right? And we have to accept that as a community, and that's some of the work that we're working on. And it's things that I think you all need to be thinking about when you're going out there and starting your businesses, and it goes to programs, it goes to events, it goes to different ways of utilizing real estate, because we're gonna have a lot of ground floor real estate, right? And my gut is, even if none of these projects delivered, we'd probably still have vacancy rates in Cambridge that are going up. Probably. I'm not convinced, but likely. So let's talk about the landlords. How are they making decisions, right? How do you contract with them? What do the deals look like? So the landlord perspective is pretty simple. They're looking to create value, right? And there's all sorts of different kind of value. It's not all monetary, right? If I'm a landlord that went out and bought a one-story building on Massachusetts Avenue that has 2 storefronts, and I either raised money from friends and family, or I went to a bank, or I just put in a lot of money that I need to get a return on, I only have one little sliver of rentable square footage to extract value from. So other things are going to be important, but there's no doubt I need to reach a certain amount of money for my debt service to pay back my investors, right? Simple. Relatively simple, right? The other way of looking at it, and we have a lot of these folks in Cambridge, is they're looking at overall value creation. You want a building with 20 stories above. You know, a building where you're trying to bring in the next Google, and the next Google cares about what's on its ground floor, right? You think about value differently, and economics aren't necessarily the only thing. I think part of it also, when you're chasing real estate, is thinking about storytelling. Different landlords, whether they're mega institutions or, it's a husband and wife who own a building in North Cambridge, there are things that are important to them, whether or not it's environmental responsibility, whether or not it's doing deals with, minority and female-owned businesses who traditionally just haven't opened as many stores, or whether it's they're just really into food. I think there's an element on the landlord side of storytelling that as a small business you really have to be keen and tap into. And there's also this element of thinking about your landlord as your partner, which we can get into quickly. So the middle 3, I think, are kind of your classic stuff. Stability and tenancy, right? There's really no way of knowing as a landlord what the stability is going to be until you put someone in the space. But I think what is really important, and I think is kind of low-hanging fruit, is how do you go into a process where you're looking for real estate, where you're organized, you know what's going to cost you to open, and you know where those funds are coming from. So what are your sources of funds and what are your uses of funds, just to get you to open? Whether it's $10,000 or $1 million, you got to know it. Then once you get open, who's your team, what's your plan? Those are things that are indicators to landlords about whether or not this is going to be a stable management, non-intensive tenant. And landlords want that, right? They don't want to have to worry about the viability and sustainable of their tenants. And the last one, the middle one, for any of you who've rented space before, you inevitably have a conversation about a security deposit or a guarantee. First of all, don't sign a personal guarantee. You just don't do it, right? I've done it, so I've gone against my own recommendation in commercial leases, but it's not something you should do. But I think the downside protection for the landlord, are there other things you can give up besides a personal guarantee to give the landlord some comfort that they're protecting their own downside, whether it's a security deposit, whether it's convincing them that the investment you're making into their space makes their real estate more valuable, so God forbid it doesn't work out, they're going to be in a better position to go out and lease their space. So how do you do these deals? I'm going to try to buzz relatively quickly through these. Traditional retail lease 1.0, right? And this is a slide, again, we use with landlords, right? Traditional lease, you come in, you pay a rent. Everything you do to fix the space is on you. You spend your hard-earned money, simple. The lease is either something called triple net, right? talk about information overload. Just get ready here. I'm going to throw a lot of stuff at you from a lease perspective. It's either triple net lease, right, where you go and you pay a rent, $30 a square foot, right? And then on top of that, you pay the proportionate share, so meaning 10,000 square feet of retail and you lease half of it. You're going to pay half of the real estate tax bill, half of the insurance, half of the operating expenses to operate that. That's triple net. So you have your per square foot cost, and on top of that, you pay all these expenses. The other one is the landlord just says to you is like, look, pay me $3,000 a month, covers everything, you pay your electric. And both those kind of deals are being done in Cambridge. They're both very traditional deals. The second is what we call retail lease 2.0. If you can find that landlord who actually looks at, to my prior point, value as being something other than just the dollars coming in the door, I think there are opportunities to look at getting investment from that landlord, especially for restaurants, the concept of percentage rent, sharing upside. So look, give me $30 maybe the market. I want to come in and pay you $15 a square foot, right? In exchange, once I do over $1.5 million in revenue, I'm going to give you 6% of every dollar that comes in the door. Some tenants hate doing that. Some tenants are willing to say, look, you take a risk on me, I'll share my upside with you. So strategy has worked really well for our team in Cambridge and something to think about. And the last one kind of goes to these alternative scenarios that I was talking about. Are there situations where you truly can enter a deal as a partner to a landlord, where they're putting in a lot of upfront cash to help you with your build, where their reasons for doing a deal may be different than the usual reasons in that husband and wife team that own that single-story building are? And I think if you're looking in Cambridge, there are some of those deals out there, and I would highly recommend thinking about those deals and who are the landlords who are willing to do them. And I think that the reason I give this presentation to landlords is, believe it or not, and you're probably skeptical, there are a lot of landlords that look at that last bullet and they say, look, we just want X, Y, and Z. And we want a good tenant who does this. A secondary conversation is about rent, right? And we're really lucky in a city that has the kind of density we have, right? And has mixed-use development that we have, that those opportunities are available in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that are not available in 99% of the communities in this country. They're just not. And that's powerful, right? That's a huge advantage. So wrapping it up, areas of opportunity, right? Flexible and non-formulaic models I hit on. Shared environments and hybrids I hit on. Third bullet I hit on. Fourth bullet I hit on. Fifth bullet, what am I talking about here? So what's really interesting is that, you know, there's this phrase within the retail development community called, like, it's either clicks to bricks or bricks to click. It's talking about the relationship between, like, online and brick and mortar retailing. And one of the things my team has realized is actually everyone thinks this is this new and novel thing. The internet may be relatively new. It wasn't around 2 generations ago, right? But this idea that, and this is the point about off-hours model, this idea that you can have a retail establishment that in the off hours has other sources of income is really powerful, right? Before I go there, the goal is you want to be in a 7-day, 2-shift neighborhood. I want to be in a neighborhood, to put another way, that during the day people come in, during the night people come in, during the weekday people come in, during the weekend people come in. Simple, right? We have a lot of mixed-use neighborhoods in Cambridge where that exists. We're very fortunate, but not all of them do, right? So the idea of this, you know, off-hours model, I was walking here, Kendall Florist, been here for 3 generations, they have it. They have a retail storefront, and they run their commercial business out of it as well. University Stationery, been here for 3 generations in Cambridge. Same model, right? You walk into University Stationery, 300 Massachusetts Ave. Yeah, you can buy pens and notebooks, and they have great stuff. But there's a desk in back, and they're running their commercial business. It's a hybrid, right? So as a small business community, we've been doing all this stuff for a long time to subsidize retail spaces, similar to this whole bricks and click thing that people are talking about. And it's something that I'm really proud of Cambridge as a community for having. And it is really powerful. And I think Pardis mentioned the little details. There's a block, I live in North Cambridge. I don't know if any of you live there. But it's almost the block down when you're driving out towards Arlington. You pass Pemberton Farms on your right. There's a block of really beautiful storefronts, right? I think it's between Dover and Day, or Day and Dover, right? On the right-hand side, going out towards Arlington. It's a really hard place to open a business during the week. There's just not that much foot traffic at 10 a.m. or 4 p.m. There's just not during the weekday. The businesses that will make it there and that have opened there, you know, the chocolatier, they use it as their commissary. They're making chocolate there during the day. And the majority of their retail sales are, I'm almost certain, and I haven't talked to them, but I guarantee you it's in the weekend and the evenings, right? So I think for all of you to think about these opportunities, if for whatever reason you're not in Harvard Square or Central Square or Inman Square or or Kendall Square, thinking about how you embrace this idea of off-hours model, I think will be really, really important to kind of long-term viability. So with that, I'll open up to questions. I think we have a little bit of time. I don't see parties here. Yeah. Do you want to plug the webinar on May 8th and tell me what it is? Is it Leasing Basics? Yeah. So there'll be a webinar on May 8th that will go over actually a term sheet, right? Like when I say term sheet, we're not going to go over retail lease. But what are those 20 or 30 items that everyone here, or actually any small business negotiating a lease, that you should have on your radar, right? So there's some of those things that have to do with security deposits and guarantees, which I referenced, but it's also thinking about how do we layer in thinking about what is truly triple net and what are those things landlords can actually charge us for, right? Because there are some things, if you're in a mixed-use building and you're in the first floor, elevator shouldn't, the landlord shouldn't charge you for the elevator fees. So we'll go over some of that sort of stuff. It's a workshop we've done, I think the last time we did it was probably 2011. Is that right? So it'll be fun to redo that. And that's on the 8th, parties?
Yes.
Okay. Lunchtime.
So why is there so much empty retail space between Porter Square and Harvard Square right now? Is it the internet that's killing it, or the high rent? And some of those places, they've been available for over 2 years.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I used to own a student directory business 20 years ago. There's always been vacancy on that strip. I'm not sure that's a phenomenon of the internet or something new, but I've always experienced that strip as having vacancy. And actually, vacancy is okay. Like, turnover is okay. That, to me, seems like a relatively robust stretch. It may be a combination of different things. I know Evergood has been vacant for a little while there. I know there's some, I saw recently new for lease signs, but I actually think the stretch between, so we worked on the Berry Line deal, the High Rise Bakery deal, and the Julia deal, the restaurant there. I love that stretch. I mean, that's also my neighborhood. I think there are some of the most vibrant small businesses in Cambridge there. I actually, in the future, that stretch will do even better because those spaces are sized right for the current tenants, like the new creamery that opened, Bagelsaurus, et cetera. But it's a good question. I can look into it.
Beach Street to Porter Square, there's a couple of big spaces available where Bob Slate used to be. That new building's been empty for a year and a half at least on the ground floor.
Oh, excuse me. You're talking the other side of Porter Square.
I'm talking about where the sporting goods store is.
Yeah. Going out towards Arlington after Porter Square. The question was, why is there so much vacancy? I had thought gentleman was talking about between Harvard Square and Porter. I think you're talking about going actually westbound outside of Porter. That one building's been vacant for a really long time. I think that actually is one of those neighborhoods that is relatively challenged from a foot traffic perspective. I mean, amazing thing about retail is that you go one block in the wrong direction, and your foot traffic could drop 80%, right? The other thing that's interesting is that a couple of those buildings, there's no retail on the other side of the street. There's, and I think some of those buildings haven't had that much investment. But it's a great question. I think Newtown's been there for 50 years there. That's the block you're talking about. Yeah. I don't know the answer. Do you have an idea?
No, but I spent last weekend, I walked a lot of Cambridge from Central Square to Porter Square, and was pretty blown away by how much empty retail space is out there on the ground floor. I'm hearing how, real estate, I mean, one of the slides earlier was how little available retail space there is, 2% vacancy or something in the city. And that's just not what I'm seeing out there. And I don't know, I mean, the corner of Pemberton Street or Ringe Avenue and Mass Ave, that building's been empty for 2 years. Where the sporting goods store was, there was a health place that went in there briefly, but it's been empty now for a year. The new building that went up where Bob Slate, I mean, that's been empty for 2 years.
So I mean, we could have this conversation in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and we'd have the same thing. There are always going to be vacancies. I think one of the reasons that block, I know some of the characters over there, part of what's happening is landlords haven't quite caught up to the reality that they're not going to get a 10-year lease. 10 years, I mean, there'll be more change in the next 5 years than there has been the last 20 years in retail. So I think part of it is landlords aren't quite catching up. They're getting there. They'll get there. They'll start to do 2, 3, 4-year leases. They're going to have to. And I think we're going to experience more turnover. Because I think a lot of businesses that could exist today because of rate change in 5 years, their models are going to be not necessarily obsolete, but things are going to change. And that's why setting yourself up for pivot is so important. And that's why, in my opinion, talk a lot about the importance and the reasons for engaging as a community with small local owner-operated businesses. That's why they're equipped to weather this. These chains are not.
I thought it was interesting that you said that landlords were looking for stability. I own Violette Bakers, which is the only gluten-free bakery in the region, and I actually have found the opposite, that all they care about is price, and they like that you go in and you improve their facilities, and when your lease is up, you're out, or you're going to be paying a lot higher price. I think the reason why all of those spaces above Porter Square are available is because the price is very high and there's no parking and there's no walking traffic. Like, I looked at many of those spaces a couple years ago. I couldn't afford a single space. And then the third thing is many landlords don't want to rent to somebody who is either not a box store or who doesn't have a mother or father or investor, et cetera, that has $1 million, backup that they can provide. So those are, my experience on the ground. I ended up going into a space that was a third of the size that I said was my minimum space, and we've actually made it work. It's 425 square feet for everything: baking, storage, selling, and it's very cute and it works, but I had a real hard time finding that space.
Yeah, and there are just some landlords who don't care. I mean, I'll say it. And I think that's a challenge. And we're constantly trying to educate landlords, but I think there are probably dozens and dozens of people with the same story in Cambridge. We've been really fortunate in that we haven't worked with that many of those landlords, but we know they're out there. And when I was on the tenant side, I was dealing with this all the time. I think there are things, and there is education you can provide to these landlords to help them kind of take the plunge. And the market, the problem is the market will solve some of that, but the market's moving so quickly, by the time they catch up, we're already into a new cycle.
So I think we have an ability to take 2 more questions. It's on the way.
Okay, sorry. I actually have 2 questions, so maybe cheating, but they should be quick.
I'll go quick too.
Okay. The first one is, so I'm wondering if it's worth the premium to be near a train station.
Yes.
Okay, that was quick. And then my second question is, one thing that's always really confused me. So I live on Charles Street, and I'm not sure if you know that street, but it seems to be high foot traffic, very touristy, yet there's like 3 leather goods stores in a row.
Charles Street in Boston?
Yeah, in Boston. There's like 3 leather goods stores in a row that never gets any foot traffic, and like 4 different antique shops. I'm just wondering what the rental situation there is like, and why these very low profitable stores can exist on that street. Or if you wanted to get a space, how you would negotiate with the landlord there.
Not an easy answer. I can tell you that one of the challenges we're seeing, and the reason that some landlords aren't doing deals, and there are a couple specific properties on Charles Street that are like this, is that they've recently been sold, and there's an amount of debt service on those assets where, unless those landlords reach that minimum, they're never going to do those deals. And that's the case in certain markets, and that's always going to be the case, and that's been the case 10 years ago, but 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But to your first point, just tell one quick story. My sister is one of the co-owners of Crema Cafe in Harvard Square, and in the early days, they've been there for 10 years. It was 10 years on April 1st. And they pay a lot of rent to be there. Their landlord would like them to pay a lot more rent to be there. But the question was, do you pay that delta in rent to be in a location like that? And the answer pretty quickly was yes. And when you look at the economics, although it's hard to do this as a restaurateur, food and beverage is a different calculation. If you're a restaurateur, you want your rent to be anywhere from 5 to, call it, 10% of your revenue, right? So rent is actually not rent is not the thing that really crushes these businesses sometimes. It's really cost of goods, cost of labor. Like those are the things that are getting really expensive in this market right now. And this is really just for restaurants. So justifying paying that extra 30, 40, 50 bucks a square foot, given the relationship of that to overall revenue, that made all the sense in the world. And I think being on the red line, or being over by Leechmere, on the green line, like that's where I would open. But there's no doubt you have more sophisticated landlords who are asking tougher questions, who are spending more money to buy that real estate, and those are harder deals to get done. And you have to be more organized.
So our last question?
Sure. This is a slightly different question. How do small businesses hire, retain, and train quality staff? Because most owners can't clone themselves yet. So I've been also very disappointed. I go into some smaller stores. The first store is great. The second one is less great. The third store is even less great because their inability to, one, as we get to closer to full employment, it seems like it's getting very competitive, especially for F&B, to find great staff.
That's not a topic of my presentation. Yeah, it's really hard. Every small business we're dealing with is struggling with that. And it's really complicated as well because it's getting just harder to find folks. And a lot of the folks that are most willing to work in some of these businesses can't live close to the city and they don't want to drive an hour. So, I mean, it is a complicated answer, but it's only going to get harder. The number one challenge that small businesses face today, in my opinion, is not high rent at all. It is cost of labor and finding good labor and getting them to work, right? And that's been our experience.
So thank you, Jesse.